Me and Sal are speaking from a very difficult location right now, so bear with us for this, but we'll do our best.
Thanks very much. So, Thalak and Uriel are just in the aftermath of Eve Amsterdam, and everyone's packing up behind them. So there might be a little bit of noise on the stream there, but it's going to be okay. So here we are. This is a fairly irregular format for us. Normally we do in-character stuff. We are still working things out here. Now, big tinfoil warning. We do data mining. We look at the backstory behind events. We try and think ahead and guess what's coming. If you don't like spoilers, you may not want to listen to everything that's about to follow. We are likely to be horribly wrong about a lot of things. We do have our ISD guest here to heckle us when we get it completely wrong off the mark. But of course, he's not going to let everything slip. Now, this episode is coming very hot after some reveals and some very big in-world news. So what we think now is already what they think now is already very different from what it was a week ago, and probably a week from now they'll have some new ideas too. So none of this is set in stone. This is just our impression of what seems to be going on. Before we continue, we would like to dedicate this episode to Saro Captain Oveg Drust, the iron-fisted fuzz of our hearts. Now, today's topic, first of all, we're going to take a look at what's been revealed during this weekend at Amsterdam. We are going to talk all about the Triglavian Collective. We're going to talk about their press release, if you can call it that, on the billboards, their shipyard, their Semiosis consoles, the Svarog Clade video, and we'll also be digging a little bit into the Drifter, Rogue Drone, and Sancha background lore, since that seems to be coming up on the horizon as well. So first of all, kicking us off, probably the person best informed on this has got to be Uriel. What can you tell us, Uriel, about what's been revealed at Amsterdam, first of all, from the scope?
So the new scope at Amsterdam here was, let's see, it shows us a few things. It talks about the shipyard construction found in the high-level abyss sites, gives a little bit of speculation on things, mentions the interesting loot that's coming from them. Those will be the Semiosis consoles and whatever they are there. And it also mentions a very nice thing about Katya, who has finally finished her 9 years long journey of visiting every system in the game without dying.
Woohoo!
Fantastically. But in addition to that, they voiced that Concord would like Capsuleers to hand over all the Semiosis consoles that we have, and the scope itself said, yeah, don't do that. So, fighting the power a little. So we'll see where that part goes. But apart from that, really, there's not a bunch here that was covered that wasn't covered by the discourse stuff that came out. We scooped them, I suppose, and the
points to Rill here for being the voice of the news for the discourse, along with Elinari Rodan. So, if he sounds familiar as he's guiding us through that, it's because you've likely heard beating the scope to the news by a day or more.
Well, and of course, it's Makoto who writes the scripts for all that, so we wouldn't have much of a show without him. So now, in the scope, they weren't very clear whether this was actually a structure or a ship or possibly both. We thought it was both.
So the thing itself is some large construction inside some big mass of pieces of metal and construction bits around it. It does look like it has thrusters, though, and points on one of its big wings. So there's a lot of thought on what it might actually be. Funny enough, this thing also is very obviously now the thing that is on the poster for the Eve Invasion World Tour, which you've seen all the way through there. So all of that, you'll see that in the pictures for the World Tour.
So now this is not this thing that's being built there. It's not one of the newly announced Triglavian ship.
Nope, this was not announced today. Basically, the ones that they did announce, there were 3 new Tech 2 Triglavian ships, which are going to be the Nurgle Assault Frigate, Ikaturso, it's a heavy assault cruiser. Now these are Tech 2 Triglavian ships. If I disconnected.
You broke up a little bit there. So that's the Nergal assault frigate, the Draugr command destroyer, shades of Skyrim there, and the Ikiturso assault cruiser. Is that?
And I'm gone. Why isn't my mic connecting?
We can hear you.
Oh,
So to cover the pardon, to cover the names. So
am I?
what? Indeed, you are. So what CCP has done with the naming is I think they've referenced three different naming schemes. Nergal is a Mesopotamian deity rather, and so that's probably going to be Galente. Draugr references Nordic mythology, which is where Skyrim got it, and so it's likely to be Minmatar. And Ikiturso is a corrupted spelling of a Finnish legend of a deep sea monster. And so that is likely to be Kaldari. Now, the thing that we're not really sure about, which will be interesting to watch, will be how exactly CCP is going to balance these, because it seems like with the Zarmast, for instance, they used the Tech 2 resist profiles for the Guardian and slapped it onto a Triglavian hull. So, do we end up with like a shield Ved hack? Or do we end up with like a very speedy Minmatar command destroyer that's also shield? Or there are lots of questions there.
So in terms of the lore, these are not actually Triglavian ships, right? They're Empire ships, yeah?
Yeah, with these, the ships are Triglavian in design origin, but then basically each empire is putting their own spin on one of those to make a Tech 2 vessel. Like we already said, the Amar with the Zarmazd, and then fairly obviously, each of the other three are one of each of the other three empires doing their thing with another Triglavian ship. So any Tech 2 Trig ships are not made by them.
And talking of balance, like, I mean, the existing Triglavian ships that are in the game, they're already pretty badass, right? Is that accurate? I mean, I don't know. I've got no idea.
Yeah.
Tell me.
It's one of those things where it depends. I think the Kikimora is widely loved. The Drekavek, which is the battle cruiser, I think has some fans. The Leshak is really quite popular for like small scale structure bashing and brawling and that type of thing. And seeing as prices have come down, they seem to be growing in popularity. But I think consensus, and I am by no means a master fitter type here, the frigate and the cruiser, the Tech 1 ones, are sort of viewed as anemic by comparison.
Especially the Damavik.
Which is a shame because it's so pretty.
Okay, so the idea of having like an assault frigate or an assault or a hack that's like got this escalating damage weapon and all these empty utility high slots doesn't necessarily make them overpowered.
I think it's a lot with because of the way that the trig ships work, in the fact that they've got a lot of utility high slots. It's generally the reason the frigate sort of size ship doesn't do so well is the utility slots for smaller ships for high slots aren't really super powerful, whereas when you get to one sort of battleship and cruiser size, they're a little bit more useful. So I think that's kind of why that exists at the moment. It's a ship that has a lot of utility but just can't really utilize those top slots when it comes to small size modules.
Okay, right. So this is the news from Amsterdam. That's what's actually been revealed in the last 2 days, right? Let's talk a little bit about what we learned in the couple of weeks before Amsterdam, because there's been quite a lot of new information, news dropped, hasn't there? Starting off then with the capital shipyard. General, what can you tell us about that?
So if I stick the pictures up here. So these are the pictures that we've had that's come through with regards to what we believe is the shipyard that's been found in Tier 5 abyssal space. But what is actually being built at it, we don't quite know yet. I think it's kind of been a bit of a mystery that people are like, "Ooh, is this capital ships coming, or is this something else that's being built?"
Well, so what I'd say in response to the debate as to whether it's a ship or a station, if you're constructing a station, you wouldn't necessarily need an external girder, as happens in this case, wouldn't you? And then, of course, also as we were poking at the model and looking at pictures, people were seeing things that looked like Triglavian style or collective style engine clusters, and that could certainly have been like an array of docking bays or such, possibly, because it is certainly a ship that's under construction. We can't really see it moving around. But the flip side is, like, when you see things that look like engines, it's quite suggestive.
Right, and this has also got weapon mounts, hasn't it? There was something on the news about that, like weapon mounts for the what do you call them? Entropic disintegrators.
Yeah. So again, that's one of those things where there's a flat spot that looks very much like a mounting, but of course, this would be the first time that we've seen a capital scale mounting for the Triglavian collective. So, it's one of those things where we're certainly tinfoiling that that's what it is, and it would be phenomenal to have a Triglavian dreadnought. But you know, beware, we're looking into a crystal ball and may not be seeing everything clearly.
What we're seeing on stream right now, that's like data mined, isn't it? Those aren't photos that we're looking at from the tier 5, because in the tier 5 it's all very, very cloudy and mysterious.
In the tier 5, it's very mysterious and cloudy. These ones are the extracted pictures, correct?
Yeah, and to make another note of something to do with this big um, construction thing here. Well, actually, just completely forgot the point I was going to make because my mic was getting weird. Shoot.
Distractions abound. What I will say, though, is that the pictures that are currently up of the reconstructed models, Uriel sorted those out with the extraction, and I want to say, Uriel, didn't you also put up a version with it alongside? Wasn't it? Was it an Anshar or a Moros?
I put one up. I put one up alongside a Moros, so it's just around the right size to be comparable to that. We know it's probably going to be a little bit wider than it looks in the picture. You can see it from above because it has much longer wing areas, which you can actually see in the end of the vault video that actually also just recently showed up and was teased at the end of the Eve keynote at Amsterdam here as well.
Okay, so this looks like a scary dreadnought that's coming who knows when. Do you think it's going to be player flyable, or is it going to be an NPC, or maybe both?
Well, I wouldn't be surprised if it shows up as an NPC, but every other Triglavian ship so far has been introduced just as it becomes available to players in the first place. Filling out a whole precursor ship line, this whole Invasion World Tour thing, a lot of other things just seem to point towards some fun things happening. And I'd honestly, I have no knowledge of whether or not it would go in, but I'd be very surprised if it wasn't something that came into player hands.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the loot that can be retrieved if you find one of these things, because you can't blow up the shipyard, can you? We're talking about abyssal dead space pockets, which means you're in there all alone, yeah? So basically you have to run past this big fleet of Leshak battleships if you want to get any loot out, and just avoid being slaughtered.
More or less. So
I'll let Makoto take this actually, yeah.
yeah, thank you. So yeah, basically how it happened is CCP introduced an alternate room in Tier 5, that's the chaotic abyssal sites. And what happens is you spawn into it. If you get it, it is the entirety of your abyssal run. And there is going to be a fleet of Leshaks and such about like 120 kilometers away. And between you and them will be a vault. So that's your usual like biocombinative or etc. Loot container that you can smash to get stuff. From that, you get then what is called a semiosis data vault, which contains the usual loot for the run, and or actually the container, the usual loot structure, contains loot and the semiosis data vault, which then gives you what is called a semiosis conduction console. So the term semiosis is a philosophical one relating to the construction of meaning and signification of meaning. And I'm by no means a philosophy student, so I'm probably going to get it terribly wrong if I go much further on that. But the long and short is, as we've seen demonstrated, is it may be how the collective communicates or relays data.
I was wondering if Thalak can tell us something about the meaning of the word semiosis.
Not without going too much into detail about things that you don't want to know.
Which means that I'm sure there have been extensive internal discussions as to the precise use of the term and what it means in this case.
There is one thing that is interesting. They are building really big ships, but I'm not sure if we know if they're going to be hostile or not so hostile. So that's going to be an interesting one.
If I may. So, okay, if you don't like data mining, cover your ears right now because I'm going to say something.
La 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 la.
Yeah, precisely. So on Singularity, recently there were a set of NPCs added to the title of like invading Dramovic, invading Leshek, and so on. Now the interesting thing is, of course, that the Diamond AI, the new NPC rats, can be assigned to groups and given modules essentially on the fly, so they can behave how they please. But what this also means is that there's a new set of type IDs, a new set of NPCs with invading in the name that CCP can play with and have on like different spawn tables. And so let's say hypothetically, of course, that you've got a power that is fighting, say, like the Sancha and Drifters, and wants to actively engage them and locally exterminate them. Well, wouldn't you do that by invading? And in that situation, then of course, if there's a dreadnought, it would make a wonderful either capstone engagement for a fleet incursion style, or it could also be that a bunch of those show up and start bashing structures that, for instance, they think that that structure is held by people who are unfit or, in league with Sancha or Drifters or such.
So the purpose of the big ship is the mortification of the unfit.
Or the glorification if they demonstrate their fitness by successfully engaging the fleet, yes.
And that is cladistic proving. Wow, these guys have some weird turns of phrase. Maybe this is a good segue into what they actually said, because they released a statement, didn't they? This is about a week ago, right?
Yeah, we can...
Zoria Triglov statement, which you've hopefully seen by now, with basically it invaded, it took over. Sorry, the Triglavian Collective broadcast a message onto every billboard in the game. There were sound with them too, if you saw them on the ones near Stargates, and the ones there, Zoria Triglov, as they/it/anything else that might be, speak and talk about a little about the Abyss, a little about their enemies, a little about what they are planning to do.
We actually have that video here, so if you give us just a moment, we can put that up. So, give me a second.
Let's hear those fake Russian accents.
We are Zoria Triglov. We speak for the congregation of Trigs outside the struggle.
We are an emanation of the clades.
We are an emanation of the clades of Perun, Velis, and Svarog.
Hear the words of our prayer.
Hear the words of our prayer.
Heed them.
And heed them.
The ancient domains beyond.
The ancient domains beyond the floor of Viraj were lost to us.
Intruders from the ancient domains have entered the flows.
Intruders seek to corrupt the flow of Viraj and the domain of Bujan. The ancient enemy Azdaja must be extirpated.
Deviant automata must come
Be
forth or be extirpated.
Corrupted Narodnia must be extirpated.
Must be extirpated.
Human augmented Narodnia must prove the direction of their flow. Narodnia
Moving with the flow of may be fit to enter.
Narodnia without fitness will be expelled from the flow.
Expelled from the flow.
The convocation of Triglov outside the struggle invoke
Cladistic Druid.
Glorification for the fit and mortification for the
Unfold on the flow. Triglov outside the struggle will be glorified anew.
glorified.
Nothing can halt the flow of Viraj.
Flow of Viraj.
We speak for the convocation of Triglov outside the struggle.
We are Zoria Triglov.
We are Zoria Triglov.
Okay, so that was creepy. And there's a lot going on there. I have a number of questions, but the first of them is, all right, here we go. This is Triglavians making like a YouTube video, right? And releasing it to the public. If they can talk, why do they need semiosis consoles? Like why do we need special equipment to communicate with them?
Well, so here's the thing, and there are a few very messy things, and we'll get into this in a bit more depth in due course. So one of the things that we've been wondering about is how exactly the Triglavian collective is structured, and the implication by the fact that, for instance, Zoria Trivlog is a tripled voice, is a nested set of three, is that it might be that this executive council, this detached executive, I believe the term is like a mix of Koshoi, Narodnia, and Navka. And they might actually, if we use Mithra's Gate as a chronicle, as an indicator, basically be communicating directly with each other via data, bounced back and forth via creepy Jovian biotech FTL communication implants. And so in this situation, it might be that they've taken the notion of the infomorph rather further than New Eden has. And so when they are communicating, they're essentially transferring concepts back and forth. So instead of having the signification of meaning where I'm attempting to encode information in speech and then you are hearing the speech and then attempting to decode the information, they may just engage in direct exchange of symbols using technical means.
Well, okay, hang on. So if they're using symbols, that's still language, that's still communication as we know it. What you seem to be describing is direct mind-to-mind communication, where if they talk to each other, they don't need language. But if they talk to us, they do, and that's where semiosis comes in. Am I right? Does that make sense?
I mean, that's certainly one interpretation, and this is sort of a question that we have at this stage. So clearly, the video and audio that went out over the billboards is a direct message, almost a challenge sent to the people of New Eden. It's certainly declaring intent to engage in, essentially localized exterminatus against Sancha and Drifters, and then it's a challenge to prove fitness to Capsuleers. But then what we saw with the Svarog Clade message is like a rotating wireframe and then triangle with no audio that was sent by the Svarog Clade to all holders of Svarog Clade semiosis conduction consoles. So it may be that, for instance, the video that was sent out was the Triglavian collective attempting to communicate directly with the people of New Eden, but the thing that got mailed out a couple of days ago may have been intended to be a more internal communication. But when I say that there are questions, of course, there is that question. Are these semiosis conduction consoles intended to be put into whatever they're building, or are they intended to be something that Capsuleers get so that they are then pulled into the collective?
Well, it's something I want to mention that anywhere we've gotten to in the Abyss thus far, it's really been appearing that these have been places that the Triglavians have given us access to. Even the initial filaments, when they all started showing up in data sites, and the knowledge now that there are conduit loops that we're going through, which are the abyssal sites we regular run, and they're seeing what we're able to do. So if we're only just now getting access to this very big room that's well defended, having another one of these things we can take from it and look at and gain information from, just as we were at some point given we were allowed to use access on the caches and gain those data streams. What, you know, if we're getting into the room with this ship construction, perhaps that's intentional as well.
Entirely possible it's intentional, but there's also the question, what if this is a corruption of the flow of Virage? What if, you know, this wasn't necessarily intended, but is in fact the Abyss not operating the way the Triglavians want it due to intervention from other forces? And that's tinfoil, that's totally out there, you're probably right. But I just tossed it out there because, you know, we don't know.
Okay, so I have a related question. Like, before we get into the stuff that we can encounter in these pockets and who's fighting who, still on that video, we've got like 3 voices, okay? And they're saying basically the same thing, but you can notice that sometimes only 2 of them are speaking. Like, there are sentences that one of the voices doesn't say. Is that right? But apart from that, they all say the same thing, don't they? No one actually has a different text.
Yes.
About that there, yeah. Where so we have gained some new data streams alongside these semiosis consoles, and in those something is mentioned called the detached executive troika, the convocation of Triglav outside the struggle. By all indications, it seems silly and a little unlikely that it wouldn't be the case that this would be the Zoria Triglav. Troika things, which have actually been mentioned before in other data streams, we might now have a little bit of a semblance of an idea of what those actually mean, in that there are definitely 3 distinct voices, if not entities, involved here. I'm not sure what any of it would be, but some sort of thing where you would call it a troika, or at least the Triglavians would, is what I take from it.
Right, so I get that. We've got these 3 voices, and they're more or less speaking in harmony, but maybe with some differences. But it really strikes me, we hear 3 voices, but we see 1 face. Now, what I find myself asking is, are the Triglavians doing some funky infomorph stuff where they've got like 3 minds in 1 body? Could that be a thing? And if they have, how would the sleepers feel about that? Because don't the sleepers have a really strict rule of 1 mind, 1 body?
Well,
Yeah.
at least they do. It's, I don't know, it's an unknown thing, but I also want to mention a little chronicle that came out, a little secretive one, Mithra's Gate, where something was mentioned. Place Mithra's Gate within there was a sort of I don't want to call it cloning facility because it wasn't quite that, but it was a cloning something with specifically says tripled outputs.
Ooh.
Relation time wise to all of the things with the Abyss originally starting to show up. You know, in their obsession with 3. I've been thinking for quite a while that the stuff at Mithra's Gate was related to that. Outputs sounds interesting, especially in context of knowing this tripled output for something to do with mind state and cloning and that sort of thing sounds relevant when you talk about these things and this 3 voices at least. I think it's worth tinfoiling a little about, at least.
Okay, well, this does quite smoothly bring us to the Drifters, of course. And the Drifters and the Triglavians do seem to hate each other, don't they? So what is going on there? Could it be about this? Could it be like the Drifters hate the Triglavians because they have 3 minds in 1 body?
So...
okay, fine. You talk first, Mac. Then I'll probably... So a bunch of stuff.
When it comes to drifters, yeah, there are many words to be said. Okay, so one thing I will say is that on Mithras Gate, sorry to cut back to that, that is an essentially ancient Jovian facility. So it's Second Empire Jove, which means it's way back in the Dark Age. And one of the themes that we see with the Triglavians is that they have been in the pressure cooker of the Abyss. We think. Apologies, people with souped-up vehicles outside. It's entirely possible that they started one way and they have changed radically since that. So it may have been that, for instance, they had 3 people linked and just sort of link up the chain that way. And then what it meant to be in a triple changed, where, for instance, you have Narodnia, or people or folk, essentially, or the Novka, which may have been, for instance, infomorphs who have lost their body. And then you have the Koshoi, who are the deathless, and what exactly that means we can raise questions about. Which, of course, then leads into the drifters. Uriel, go.
So, drifters. Basically, there's a couple of main lines of what people think the drifters are. Is important when you talk about why the Triglavians might hate them, as they obviously very much dislike each other. So a lot of information, a lot of support at least, leans towards the drifters, being these guys called the Others, which were strong AIs that showed up in the Sleeper virtual reality very, very long ago. Personally, this is my best bet. But the others were basically infomorphs that cropped up within the Sleeper VR. They have no bodies. They knew the VR world was fake. They wanted to get out of it. And then we know the drifters to have bodies that they are making because either, the sleepers with their actual bodies rotting away, or if it was anything to do with the others, which I will go into a little more about too, they would need bodies, wouldn't they? And then with that also, you'll say that there was also an other in Jamil Storm's head, and the drifters did kill Jamil Storm, which might sound, like maybe they aren't the others and they don't like the other. You have Hilan Tukos, who was also killed by the drifters, and whose infomorph was also, absconded with by the drifters, and that's how we saw him talking again. So it could go either way, and it seems more. I like the idea more of the drifters showing up and doing a headshot attack like that and disappearing so quickly, with more of a reason than to just kill this one presence. Another little thing, funny enough, there are in the NPC related files in EVE, a little more data mining stuff. This stuff showed up way back when the drifters first appeared in 2015. The Tyrannos Strategos has a line that basically the suggestion is there. It says it is unknown if this presence is even the true authority within the Vigilant Tyrannos, and that line alone is so suggestive to have at all that it really leans me even further towards that. So personally, I think the drifters are the others, and the others' enemy were these guys called the Enheduani, which were, if you want to put it really simply, they were the admins of the Sleeper VR after having been sort of an Illuminati sort of presence for the Second Empire Jove, and way before that, the Jove that stayed awake while the rest of the Jove sort of hibernated, coming out of the Eve Gate and settling in heaven for their First Empire. So First Empire, Second Empire, they were in New Eden. The Sleepers disappear, the Enheduani disappear with them. And we also hear about the Enheduani, though, in Theodicy, a short story that is available to read online, where they are very interested in and towards their ideal. And that ideal apparently includes the Minmatar as displaying a way of life closest to their plans, in that they would be able to reach their ideal form of civilization as the Enheduani see it. Then drawing from that, though, did the others as they violated their rules of the construct, one mind per body type of thing. And in addition to that, they were basically, the others were messing everything up within it by having the sleepers learn that they live in a fake world, because apparently in some way, for whatever reason, they don't know that or didn't know that within at some point in history. And from that, the Enheduani and the others, then we never see any presence of these Enheduani people. in wormhole space. And then we have the drifters emerging from the sleeper civilization. No opposition from any visible Enhedwani. We do see them fighting the Sancha in the Shattered Battlegrounds, interestingly enough, in that one special system, but there's no signs of anything like a conflict with them and anyone else, which makes it seem like whoever it is they were fighting left. Going from that again, though, they liked the Minmatar, and the Minmatar way of life is based around tribes, and the tribes work together for the greater good when necessary, as we've seen. They also, basically, in long, far away Minmatar history, you can read about specifically what I'm saying on the Eve fiction article about the Minmatar elders. They have some interesting history as well, where basically this isn't something used much in the fiction yet, but it exists there for them. The Minmatar elders learned of this thing called the Turald form, which is basically some sort of pseudo-spiritual, but very real manifestation sort of thing, where they can travel. They can appear in this ghostly, tall, white robed, glowing, masked form, and this was taught to them by spirits, as it says. These spirits spoke to the original Minmatar elders through the pieces of something known as some artifacts, basically. The artifacts were all split from, or in some stories, split from one thing. The Minmatar elders all had them, and at one point it called them all to this one place. Elder of the Vihercure tribe apparently went to commune with these spirits, quote unquote, left with them, came back, was on the verge of death, and was not looking very well. One of the elders got all of the artifacts and threw them in the ocean because they were talking to the people still. So they're talking to the elders still after this with angry voices, that sort of thing. And eventually, the Vihercure elder taught them what she learned. And when she was away with them, she learned how to do this Torag form, which is an interesting thing, tall, white, glowing, masked figure thing. That in the article about it has been noted as never having been seen in wormhole space. That's explicitly mentioned for some strange reason as well. So we know the Enhedwani liked the Minmatar, wanted to see them head more towards their ideal mode of life. The Minmatar operate based on tribe sorts of things. The Enhedwani hate the others. Drifters. In this line, this is basically my whole tinfoil line. If the others are the drifters are fighting somebody they don't like. And then you go to the Triglavians, who are the clades, more or less, and the subclades, and the way they operate seem pretty interestingly comparable to the Minmatar tribes. So the clades and the collective, and the tribes and the tribal council, all of them working together when necessary. If CCP wanted to turn the Enhedwani into a more compelling faction, a little less Tony G-like, I could see them as having adapted them into the collective as a much cooler variant of that, but still not erasing this faction from the history of Eve. I also made a big forum post specifically about the Enhedwani that lists every bit of information about them and how I link all of that to the Triglavians, which if someone can link that in chat now, that'd be fantastic. And then I also have one about... No, Makoto wanted to say something also.
So when it gets to the ancient history and the involvement of precursors, there are definitely a couple of lines. The elders and the Telrog stuff is certainly creepy and suggestive as all hell. And then, of course, with the Amari, you've got the Sephirim and masked figures descending from the sky on pillars of fire, etc., etc. So it gets weird in that basically, like, when people are thinking of the history of New Eden, we usually think of, oh, hey, the four empires, they came to their respective powers via, these wars and these colonizations and subjugations and so on. But in a very real way, there is a vast dark age from the collapse of the Eve Gate to what we might consider the modern era, where it may not have been completely a dark age for the various powers that did not completely collapse. And that's, say, for instance, the Jovians. when we're discussing them, because there have been so many writers from the beginning of EVE Online to the present day, there have been times where they've taken their various spins on how these interact and how exactly the various other stories of precursor empires and such occurred. So we end up with a variety of names potentially being used for similar factions, or in some situations, they may not necessarily be the same faction so much as having a lineage. In the same sort of way that, for instance, like the Blood Raiders have a lineage that stretches back to ancient Amar via the Takmal. But of course, it's not necessarily fair to say that the Blood Raiders are the Takmal. In the same sort of way, we've got in K-Space, we've got Talakan and Youngjong and the Sleepers, and in Wormhole Space, we've also got the Sleepers and Talakan. But, for instance, like in Templar 1, Tony Gonzalez's book that has a big lore dump on the history of Wormhole Space, we get like the Sleeper history, but the Talakan are not mentioned at all. And so on and so forth. So, you end up having to wonder, it's like, okay, did these people actually coexist? Let's say the Talakan and the Sleepers. Are the Talakan referred to by a different name? Is there a group that is descended from them? Like, for instance, you see in Wormhole Space all these themes of evacuation, quarantine, and so on. And essentially that while the Sleepers are still there sleeping, the Talakan fled long ago. So if, for instance, they were the caretakers for the Sleepers and fled Wormhole Space due to the rise of the others, and where they could safely flee was abyssal space, it could be that they underwent something of a dark age. Their culture was irreparably changed. They survived because of their technology, but at the same time, in the process of surviving, became something radically different. Or, of course, it's entirely possible that they are a completely new and unknown refugee faction from the Second Empire. That's, say, not necessarily tied to the Sleepers in Wormhole Space, though certainly the fact that the Triglavians also have a hatred of the Sancha implies that there's something there. And whether this is because of their concern for the Sleepers or because of their obsession with philosophical or nigh unto religious matters, is a question. For instance, in the case of the Sancha and the Drifters, it might be that it's not that they are enemies because of the Sleepers. It may just be that there are critical philosophical differences on how exactly the people and the linking between them should operate. And so the forbidden dominance arrangement where there's top-down control of the Drifters from something else is the thing that they dislike. But I digress.
Okay, well, we're going to come back to the Sancha in a minute because the Triglavians also want to talk about the Triglavians also talked about the Sancha and not liking them. But still on the Drifters, Uriel, you wanted to come in on.
Yeah, I wanted to just add one more little note that we didn't dig in there yet about the Triglavians. With the newest data streams that we see, they actually have knowledge of the Second Empire Jove, apparently somewhat intimately, based on their knowledge of the ruling faction of the Second Empire known as the Tyrants, whose name seems to have been used as a legacy taken up by the Drifters as the Vigilant Tyrannos. They also mention that the policy or the observed patterns of the Drifters do not match quite that of the Tyrants either, and that behavioral changes may have been observed, or et cetera, et cetera. Themselves Tyrants is a very interesting bit of that, especially. I just wanted to end a bit of that with that, especially. So it's all very interesting and very interconnected, and we draw more and more lines here. I feel like I'm losing my mind, but it's fun.
Yeah, I get that. Certainly, I mean, coming in as a relative outsider, it's like it's slightly dizzying to me. But what I'm hearing and what I'm understanding pretty much is that your theories are all based around the Triglavians and the Drifters being ancient enemies somehow connected with the earlier Jove empires and the fall of the Jove and refugees from the destruction of the Second Empire in some way, and they're basically different factions from those conflicts. Is that a good summary of how you see it, depending on obviously with different variations?
Yeah, that's fairly accurate right there.
Yeah. The additional note I have is that it's very easy to fall into this trap of thinking of factions as being monolithic. And they, as much as say in the Inheritance Chronicle, and this is of course a Third Empire Jove perspective, that the sleepers, waking up or becoming aware of the world from their enclaves, are trying to come together cohesively, or possibly being forced to come together cohesively, to face the world that they have forgotten about for however many centuries. So, it could very easily be that, like, okay, well, let's say the Drifters are others. It could just be that they weren't in cooperation with the other that was riding around in Empress Jamil's head. And so, there's just sort of this element of, well, you're actually my enemy, even though we're the same creature, and we're fighting. And so on with, like, the rest of the faction.
Okay, so we've got this idea that the Triglavians and the Drifters are both remnants of offshoots of ancient civilizations, probably connected to the Jove. But then also the Triglavians really hate the Sancha. And if there's one thing we know about the Sancha, is that they are not an ancient civilization. They're very much new kids on the block, talking of boy bands. So why would the Triglavians hate the Sancha so much when they've only been around for 15 minutes in Triglavian timescales? Like, what's the big deal about the Sancha? General, you've been quiet for a while. Tell us your thoughts on this. Why the Sancha?
Of all the sections, I said, don't pick me on this one, amusingly.
Big buns.
No, I mean, my only initial thought was Sancha being a threat. We've seen them appear in Wormhole in Anoikis as well. And it's clear that they have the access to the good old-fashioned wormhole gun, where they're still capable of making incursions into any space, anywhere, at any time they choose. It's just they seem to have a bit of an accuracy problem. But maybe one of the other guys could flesh out this section a little bit for us.
Okay, well, I'll take a stab at it then. So there are two potential angles for the Triglavian hatred for the Sancha. One is the purely philosophical, oh hey, this is a hive mind with a very top-down control, lots of drones and not many not drones in there, and they hate the dominance arrangement. And the corruption.
Dominance being Sancha Kuvakai, right? The guy who created Sancha's nation. Basically mind controls everybody, right?
Yeah, I mean, if Kuvakai still exists and it's not just sort of the reimagined spirit of Kuvakai from all of the slaves needing, to reference it, if the Sancha did not have their Kuvakai, it would become them to make him? However that phrase goes. But yeah, it's definitely, like many bodies, few minds, which breaks that old rule of one mind, one body. But of course, as Stargazer references, the Sancha have also colonized certain systems in wormhole space, and we see this in some of the shattered wormholes, where they've completely purged the sleeper presence from a full constellation. And in all of the shattered wormholes, you can find silent battlegrounds where it would appear that a revenant has been destroyed by sleepers as an enclave is under attack, including, coincidentally, 2 unidentified wrecks, which may have been a little hint as to what was to come with the Drifters.
Okay, so what are your theories on how the Sancha ended up in the Abyss?
Well, that's the thing, is that we don't necessarily know if they've been in the Abyss yet. We certainly know that the Triglavian Collective intends to extirpate the Sancha, but we couldn't quite figure out if that video was shot in the Abyss or elsewhere. But it's certainly possible that the Sancha are diving in as well, and we just haven't seen it yet.
Right, because in abyssal dead space pockets, you see drifters, Triglavians, and rogue drones, but no Sancha.
Correct.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the rogue drones as well. Now, they definitely are in abyssal dead space, aren't they? You can see them in the pockets. And again, the Triglavians seem not to like them. Was that right, or was there some dissent among the Triglavians about whether they really hate rogue drones or not? Wasn't it that some of the Triglavians actually kind of think maybe they're useful?
So you have an interesting bit there, especially where you're saying, yeah, there are some different opinions on the rogue drones by the Triglavians. Svaragclade, first off, wants them to have nothing to do with them. They want to get rid of them. Then you have Velesclade. So Svaragclade calls them, wants them considered, which basically for the Triglavians means this is a bad thing, and it needs to be done away with.
Sorry, you dropped out. You cut out for a second there. Did you say they want them considered posh lost? Was that the magic word?
Yes, that's what Svaragclade considers them. Then Velesclade has the ideas of making them Sobornost, which would seem to imply cooperation in some way, even. Or use of, or cooperation, or seeing of them as something that can be useful.
I remember
in some
in the
way,
video,
at the very least.
In the video, when they were talking about the rogue drones, one of the voices didn't say the line about extirpating the rogue drones.
Yeah,
exactly.
So maybe
Because
that
then
is
you
the
have- so-
Velesclade wants to consider them Sobornost?
Sobornost, which I believe is something like being united in a religious community for a shared purpose, or there's something like that.
Yeah, that's the meaning of the real word there. Yeah, and then you have Peronclade, which doesn't lean either way right now, and it's sort of there's a stalemate as to what they want to do with the rogue drones. But we also see Velesclade already making use of them with the Vila drones that we see their ships deploying in the Abyss. Different things with them. It remains to be seen what the final decision is for rogue drones, though. So we'll see.
It's interesting as well when you think about when you go into the Abyss sites as well, and you get the different effects from the pylons, where some of the pylons will just outright destroy every type of drone that's in range. Some will actually provide additional bonuses to them as well. It kind of is reflected in that way.
The drone destroying tower, actually, its description talks about Spargblade and its its views on this. So that seems to be probably, if anything, made by them.
Mm-hmm.
There's also an unreleased pylon that has a description talking about Velesclade, and this one actually mentions the description for that one actually mentions the Floor of Virage, but since this was not seen in the game ever, in character stuff. But this has been mentioned again in the Zoria Triglav thing, seemingly being some sort of it's something important to them. Whether it's something more of a infomorphic or data type of thing, or whether it's some like sort of religious toned thing, has yet to be seen. But basically, Velesclade, or Vodia subglade specifically of Velesclade, a place for the deviant automata.
Yeah, you've got the deviant automata suppressor, and the one that you're talking about is the automata command router, which
Yes,
gives
that's the one.
20% velocity and 10% damage to local rogue drones, and minus 30% velocity and minus 15% to Capsuleer controlled drones. An interesting effect.
It's never been seen in the Abyss yet, so they
Not
may
yet.
have just never used it.
Yeah, I will mention that there are some spooky shenanigans that have happened at various points with the rogue drones. And so in the first place, of course, the rogue drones are a human creation. It was, I believe, a Galente-led colonization effort in what became the drone regions, where they were using automated processes to spread stargates and stations and so on. And then what ended up happening is that went haywire. And there are two strange things. One associated with the reopening of the drone regions, where something large and unknown came through the gates at that point, which has never really been clarified. And then later on, at some point when the end of the World Chronicles happened after the return of Jamil Sarum, rogue drones are harvesting Isogen 5, which is an unstable, powerful substance, to refuel the super weapon in Jamil's ship, which is itself sort of funky that, rogue drones are doing that. And then a Jovian gives this Blood Raider captain code to suborn and suppress the rogue drones, which implies that the Jovians have some amount of ability to interfere with rogue drone programming. So, what does that mean? I mean, that's just sort of a standing question.
Okay, so before we wrap this up, because we're in our final few minutes here, we have a couple of questions from the stream, which the general's been collecting for us. First of all, a question from, I'm going to say this right, Baxbender, who asks, why does abyssal space exist? Very philosophical question. I like it. So, Uriel, you had some thoughts on that.
Yeah, so speaking from a completely tinfoil point of view here, we know that the Talocan messed with the fabric of space-time to make Anoicus work, basically. They didn't make the space, mind you, but they messed with it so that they could easily pass between any of the systems they want. And that's obviously been very screwed up now by whatever happened with Salen and whatnot, but they did that. Stellar engineering and, messing with space-time, that's the only faction thus far that's been demonstrated to have that sort of power. But then you have the Abyss, which is a very messed up, dangerous subspace realm in which the Triglavians have taken up residence. Now, you would think that if they had control over space-time itself and messing with it and creating a realm, at least in any good capacity, that they'd be able to keep being such a deadly seeming place. The Abyss was some sort of byproduct or intentional thing of Talocan doings. That could make sense, because we still don't know where they are, but there's a lot of things that they seem to have left behind and made in their wake. I do want to mention a quick little weird bit of tinfoil here, especially. Talocan refers to the Talocan race, known within New Eden. Is really, really similar, mind you, literally one letter off from a ancient Aztec part of their mythology called, also pronounced Talocan, but it's TLA. Basically, this is the first heaven above Earth in their mythology. And where did humans go when, they left home to a sort of new place? That was very fortunate, New Eden. And this is all, again, very deep tinfoil stuff. Called themselves that based on something like Tlalocan, the TL one. There are 13 heavens in that, in Aztec mythology, and there are also 9 underworlds, levels of the underworld. CP wanted to sort of draw things in with the Talocan starting to heat up. It'd be a really interesting way to play that, with wormhole space levels having to do with the heavens, Talocan, and having the Abyss maybe have something to do with those underworlds known as Mictlan. So that's all for me. So that's really deep tinfoil. But that's my favorite idea on how the Abyss might exist in the first place.
So
that's always the way it goes with CCP lore, isn't it? Like, they come out with these names that are slightly suggestive, and if you really, really, really do the research on the word they've chosen, it tells you like everything about their plans. And it's incredible how it unfolds. But go ahead, Mac. You wanted to add something there.
Yeah, so one thing on the names is that they're basically signs on the road. They're not necessarily the road itself. Right. On one hand, greatly enrich our reading, but on the other hand, they are a dangerous trap, which is... I'll also freely admit that, I've got a similarly tinfoily interpretation of the Talocan thing. If you transliterate it to Greek, it might be more like Taliesin, which say it's referencing Talos, which is the bronze automata that circles Crete 3 times daily, I think, to protect Europa. And especially early on in the Drifter lore, and there were a lot of Cretan references, Apollo and Artemis both, the Antikythera mechanism, etc., etc. But this is one of those things where the multiple writers do end up mattering. But I could carry on for way too long. Let's move on.
Okay, well, we're pretty much out of time for this stream, very sadly. We could go on for hours, and we probably would, and I know that Mac and Uriel will certainly do so, and that in fact is the entire content of Arataka Research Consortium Slack. But for tonight, for this stream, we are going to have to wrap it up. So let's go for a final round of your thoughts, your last little fragment of tinfoil, any quick shout outs you want to make, and then we'll wrap it up. General, do you want to go next?
Yeah, I can do. Super excited to see what this structure leads to, whether it is a super ship that we'll get to see in the future. A little bit scary as to whether it's going to be something that we end up going up against or whether it's something we're going to have access to. That's still a big mystery to us, but it's something that I'm really looking forward to finding out the answer to. I have been really enjoying all the Triglavian stuff that CCP's been putting out. It's been a fantastic kind of revival of the lore that's been going out in the game. So I've just keep the pace going. I'm really looking forward to seeing what the rest of the Eve Invasion tour brings out. If we get little story segments throughout the rest of the year as the other locations events unfold. So just really looking forward to what's coming up in the near future.
Okay, Uriel, do you want to go next? Tell us your final thoughts.
Final thoughts. This stuff is very fun, and I really like the lore things, and I'm having a great time puzzling things out with all of my equally nerdy buddies. When it comes to the ship stuff, with more Trig stuff showing up, more ships coming to us, then reaching out to us even in some ways, it's just my biggest hope that line of ships will gain a second faction under that at some point. Fantastic counterpart to the Triglavians. That's my hope. But I'm very excited for what's coming. That large ship looks extremely fun. And I'm sure we're going to be learning a lot more interesting things in coming months as the invasion tour.
As the invasion tour what? As the invasion tour what, Uriel?
The suspense!
Continues?
Progresses.
Hey.
Makoto, tell us your final thoughts.
They found me.
Curses cut you out. Yes, we're at the very beginning of the Invasion World Tour, and needless to say, even the name itself is highly suggestive. So I very much doubt CCP has shown us all of the cards that they're holding, which means this is going to be a fascinating year, and especially if the things that they are teasing at this point aren't in fact the culminations of the arc, but are in fact things for like 1 or 2 meets in the future, and that they've got more coming after that. I mean, this is just me wondering. I have no idea, but it could be that we're in for a hell of a ride. And as a shout out, I'd like to thank all of you madmen who join us on this ride, who contribute with like decryption or constructing wireframes or getting us footage or this is totally going to be me shilling for ARC here. If you happen to have spare or excess semiosis conduction modules, we are currently buying them to increase our net so that we can basically get the messages as they go out more reliably, so that we can respond more quickly to CCP's madness. I'm just looking forward to the ride, and I hope you'll be with us on it.
Finally, Thalak Dalha, you've been with us, and of course you can't tell us everything you know. You know many things that we do not know, and those things we will know when the timing comes for us to know them. But can you leave us with a word of gnomic wisdom before we close out?
there's a lot of things I know. There's also a lot of things that I don't know because I want to be there when you guys start figuring them out. Because it's way more fun to be on the other side figuring things out than it is to be in the know and not being able to tell. Um, I'm hoping that there's going to be a lot of nice puzzles for you guys to unravel and a lot of tinfoil to be had. And I'm fairly confident that this is going to be a really nice year in terms of lore.
Cool. That's very encouraging. Thank you very, very much. Okay. So, final shout out from me. I do want to say big thanks to all of the Arataka Research Consortium crew for all your hard work on puzzling through these puzzles. Bigger thanks still to the whole of the CCP and ISD fiction teams and all the hard work you do bringing us these meaty morsels to chew on. And of course, the biggest of very heartfelt shout outs go to CCP Guard, who we will miss terrifically. Guard, it's been an honor knowing you, and we're really sorry to say goodbye, but we wish you the very, very best for the future. So that's it from us for tonight. Thank you very much, everybody, for listening, and we are going to leave you now with the very latest Scope broadcast. You know, they paid us a fee, so we have to show them on stream. The Discord is better, but I guess we can show the Scope as well. So we'll leave you with the Scope, and from all of us here at Arataka Research Consortium Studios, have a very, 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 very pleasant night and fly safe.
A growing number of capsuleers have reported encountering some unusual activity in abyssal dead space. The scope received these images showing a ship or structure that is apparently under construction in a previously undiscovered pocket. This type of pocket seems to be some sort of anomaly, as capsuleers state that it is encountered when using abyssal filaments for Tier 5 dead space. More intriguing still is their telemetry, showing that the gate leading out of the pocket is active upon arrival. The heavily defended construction site is located deep within the pocket, and capsuleers interviewed by the scope claim that any attempts to fight the formidable Triglavian patrols would be futile. A few capsuleers have made daring hit-and-runs at the bioadaptive caches located next to the construction site and managed to escape the pocket with some spoils. Items recovered include at least 3 variants of Triglavian semiosis conduction consoles. These seem to be a communication device of some kind, with it being reported that what appear to be internal Triglavian data fragments have been received by some capsuleers owning the devices. Concord has urged those in possession of these devices to hand them over to Concord for their own safety. For our part, the scope urges capsuleers to resist Concord secrecy and report their findings. The people of New Eden have the right to know what is going on. In other news, Katia Say of the Signal Cartel Exploration Group is being celebrated as the first human to travel to all accessible star systems of New Eden, both in known space and wormhole space. The journey through 7,805 systems took 9 years to complete. Remarkably, Katia lost no ships during this extraordinary voyage. To commemorate this achievement by one of their people, the Akura Stargazer Society are commissioning a statue to be built in Katia Say's home system of Seisio. The memorial statue will be raised near the Abagawa Gate, where the first jump of the journey was made by Katia over 9 years ago. This is Lena Amber, reporting for The Scope.
EVE Online is a vast universe, alive with the unrelenting activity and combined history of its players. Pursuing lives of adventure, warfare, and prosperity, they share this existence in the biggest single shard, free-to-play MMO of all time. Set 21,000 years in the future, EVE takes place in a distant cluster of over 7,000 star systems known as New Eden. It is a rich and diverse universe featuring densely populated havens of relative safety governed by 4 great empires. Hostile systems where player alliances make the rules. Even regions of anomalous and unexplored space that hold their own secrets. You play as a Capsuleer, a revered breed of highly trained pilot, having achieved immortality through the use of cloning technology. You navigate the universe encased in an armored capsule deep within your ship, where you have complete neural control and function as one. There are hundreds of ships to fly in EVE. Everything from small, nimble craft and versatile mid-range vessels to formidable warships and colossal freighters. Each has advantages and suited roles, but all are completely customizable as you decide how to equip and arm them. What you do in New Eden is entirely up to you. EVE's immense sandbox gives you the opportunity to choose between multiple professions and activities. The key to this unique customization of your playstyle is skill training. This is a passive process, and it continues whether you are in or out of game. As a new player, you can focus on one specific area in order to quickly reach the same level of specialization as a veteran. So be adventurous and explore new avenues of development for your character, as you can always change role and reinvent yourself if desired. If you want to fight, combat in EVE can involve solo missions against non-player adversaries, or small group skirmishes, while for some, it can even be the thrill of fleeting up with thousands of fellow pilots and battling over disputed territory. If you want to explore, then the discovery of uncharted space and ancient regions that promise riches, danger, and adventure await you. You can also engage in the business of prosperity, be it industry, mining, or even interstellar piracy. The beauty of life in New Eden is that all of these activities, and many more, can be done alone or with others. A unique in-game market, unprecedented in scale and degree of player control, is the beating heart of New Eden. Players are responsible for the manufacture of almost everything you can buy or sell. The gathering and refinement of resources, the building of ships, equipment, and even some space stations. EVE's players are core to how the universe is filled and how the economy thrives. Players in EVE can band together to form corporations where they can enrich their experience, learn new elements of gameplay, and share their wealth and goals. When these player-run corporations grow to become larger entities, they can merge with other corps to form alliances. Powerful alliances regularly compete for control and influence over large areas of space, waging wars and engaging in record-breaking battles. Even taking down well-defended, sprawling, player-built space stations. In the spirit of exploration and mystery, new content and experiences are constantly introduced into the universe, with over a decade of free expansions leading to continual development and evolution of gameplay. While every action and decision has consequences for the universe and its hundreds of thousands of players, the game remains very much about your unique adventure and story. A story that will forever be woven into the fabric of Eve.